In the Family Guy episode, The Vacation, we see a mix of humour and serious themes as Brian wins an award for an essay he wrote. After 6 seasons, he finally gets recognised and is invited to Martha's Vineyard to receive it. Meanwhile, Lois and Peter are struggling in their marriage, which is no surprise given how often they argue. Lois tries to plan nice days out and lunches, but Peter keeps choosing to hang out with his friends instead. As their arguments escalate, Brian suggests that Lois and Peter join him on his vacation. They quickly agree, especially after Chris announces he wants to learn the drums. The vacation begins with Brian and Lois enjoying some peace and quiet, free from the kids. Peter, however, takes on the role of the kid and decides to scare people, claiming, "There are no sharks out here." It seems like Peter is having the most fun. When it's time for Brian to give his acceptance speech for the award, he fills it with compliments aimed at Lois. While it's meant to be a nice gesture, it feels awkward since Brian has often shown interest in her throughout the series. As he finishes, Peter stumbles in drunk, unable to speak clearly. This is the last straw for Lois, who calls him out for missing another important family event and embarrassing her in front of others. The next morning, Peter apologizes for his behavior and promises to improve after the ballgame. In a twist, Lois invites Brian to join her for activities like biking, walking on the beach, and visiting the carnival. It feels like a perfect date day, though only Brian seems to see it that way. He often takes advantage of women when they're vulnerable, and this time is no different. Brian offers to rent movies, order room service, and spend the night with Lois. While he starts to wonder if his thoughts are getting out of hand, he ultimately cannot control himself. When they settle in for the night, Brian reveals that he wrote the essay about Lois, which flatters her but doesn't lead to anything romantic. She clearly shows that she only sees him as a friend. However, Brian pushes the boundaries. He offers her more drinks, even though she admits she's already tipsy. This is crucial to understand. What does Brian do when Lois is drunk and not interested? He forces himself on her. Even when she says no multiple times, he continues. Lois struggles against him and eventually kicks him out of the room, telling Peter what happened the next morning. Peter hears about the incident and confronts Brian at the bar. Instead of apologizing, Brian blames Peter for not treating Lois well enough, saying he doesn't deserve her. This is a classic case of shifting blame. The two end up fighting in the bar, but come to an agreement that nothing like this will happen again. This seems like an easy way out for Brian. Later, Brian goes to apologize to Lois, and surprisingly, she forgives him as if nothing happened. This episode highlights some disturbing themes, including how easily the characters forgive serious offenses. It's troubling to think about how accepting they are of such behavior. This lack of accountability only adds to the chaos of the Griffin family. Their inability to confront serious issues reflects a deeper dysfunction, making viewers question the messages being sent. Overall, The Vacation mixes humor with heavy topics, showcasing the complicated and often troubling relationships within the Griffin family. While there are comedic moments, the serious undertones make it hard to overlook the darker aspects of their interactions. In the Family Guy episode, Finer Strings, Brian takes on the role of a caregiver, which initially sounds promising. However, things quickly take a turn. The episode begins with Lois worrying about her father, Carter, who has cataracts. At a high school play, he mistakenly identifies Bryce Dallas Howard as Jessica Chastain, and then later confuses a carrot for the actress too. This mix-up prompts Lois to take action, deciding that it's time for Carter to get surgery. Carter undergoes the surgery successfully but is left temporarily blind. This gives Lois the opportunity to exaggerate how many family members showed up to support him. It turns out Carter isn't very popular, and Lois feels guilty. Dr. Hartman suggests that Carter needs someone to help him during his recovery. Instead of offering to help herself, Lois lies and says she's too busy, but suggests that Brian could serve as a service dog. Desperate to impress Lois, Brian agrees to move in with Carter while he heals. However, it quickly becomes clear that this isn't an ideal job. Carter has a strange list of requests, including asking Brian to wear a wig and help him out of the bathtub.
To do for him.
Put on this lady wig and help me out of the tub. What?
Watching Brian deal with these bizarre tasks is entertaining, especially since he often complains about rich people. As time goes on, Brian gets a taste of the luxurious lifestyle. He enjoys perks like helicopter rides and butler service, which makes him appreciate being around wealthy people. But this high life doesn't last long. During Carter's follow-up appointment with Dr. Hartman, it's revealed that his eyesight has fully recovered. Without so much as a thank you, Carter dismisses Brian, leaving him feeling abandoned. Returning to the Griffin household, Brian struggles to readjust to normal life. Lois's cooking doesn't help, and he starts to realize that he misses the luxury and the money more than he misses Carter himself. In a moment of reflection, Brian thinks that he and Carter had become friends, but he worries he might have offended Carter by treating him more like a job than a friend. The truth is clear. Brian only cared about Carter's wealth. Determined to reconnect, Brian invites himself back to Carter's home but is promptly kicked out. Frustrated, he vents to Stewie about how miserable he feels and admits that he actually misses the money rather than any friendship with Carter. In a surprising moment, Brian expresses a dark wish. He almost wishes Carter were still blind so he would still need him. Stewie, unimpressed, points out that Carter isn't blind anymore, which gives Brian an idea. He thinks about making Carter blind again. To convince Stewie to help him with this crazy plan, Brian lies, claiming that Carter said Stewie could never make it as a member of One Direction. This accusation fuels Stewie's anger, and he reluctantly agrees to help Brian. The duo corner Carter in the locker room while he's coming out of the shower and spray him with tap water from Flint, Michigan. Brian rushes in, trying to play the hero, but soon realizes that the water has caused more harm than he intended. It's a chaotic and brutal moment, and Brian tries to apologize for letting his greed guide his actions. Unfortunately, he often waits until it's too late to see reason. In a rather rushed conclusion, the episode skips over any attempts Brian makes to fix his mistakes. Instead, it jumps to a healed Carter, who reflects on how everyone has learned their lesson from the incident. The trio shares a hug, but the whole situation is overshadowed by Brian's drastic decision to attempt to blind someone for money. In the end, it's a darkly humorous take on greed and the lengths Brian will go to for wealth. In the Family Guy episode titled The Wolf of Wall Street, Brian Griffin finds himself in a series of questionable situations that make him deserve a trip to jail. The episode opens with Brian walking into Stewie's room, where he is surprised to see Stewie surrounded by every coin-operated horse imaginable. This peculiar setup allows Stewie to skip waiting in line. While Brian isn't puzzled by Stewie riding a unicorn, he does wonder how a 1-year-old could possibly afford all these rides. Always trying to prove he's the smartest one around, Brian engages in a debate with Stewie about how fair the stock market is, using a teleprompter to help him out. After their discussion, Brian goes to pick Stewie up from preschool but accidentally backs into Consuela's car. Instead of taking responsibility, he drives away, knowing he doesn't have insurance. This reckless move showcases that for all his talk about being intelligent, Brian often makes foolish decisions. Later, Stewie offers Brian a chance to make some money. He tells Brian that if he gives him $100 to cover the car damage, he can invest it in the stock market and get a big return. Brian quickly agrees, abandoning his earlier stance against the idea. Thanks to Stewie's savvy investing, they not only recover the money for the car repairs, but also make an extra $1,000. Suddenly, Brian is obsessed with investing and eager to learn more. Stewie agrees to teach Brian about investing, but only if Brian teaches him the martial art of Gym Kata, a mix of gymnastics and karate. Initially, Brian refuses, claiming it's too dangerous, but he soon changes his mind and starts the training. As Brian begins to see returns on his investments, he vows to donate $1 to cancer research for every dollar he makes. However, in true Brian fashion, he quickly breaks this promise and instead decides to rent a flashy Ferrari with Stewie. The plot thickens when Brian introduces Stewie to a shady-looking Korean company that specializes in protein shakes. Alarm bells ring in Stewie's head as he notices the boarded-up windows and heavy security outside. The company uses dog meat in their products. Brian, lacking any morals, still chooses to meet with this company, showing he's willing to ignore ethics for the sake of profit. Even Stewie is horrified and refuses to proceed, making it clear that Brian's judgment is severely flawed. During the meeting, Brian is knocked out by a chloroform-laced investor's rag. He wakes up to find himself trapped in a cage with other dogs, facing a grim fate. Realizing that Brian is missing, Stewie launches a rescue mission. He stealthily makes his way into the facility, where he encounters security guards dragging Brian toward danger. But Stewie is undeterred. He uses his gymkata skills, performing impressive moves and defeating the guards while playing Life is a Highway. After Stewie rescues him, Brian offers a rare apology, which is the only redeeming thing he does throughout the episode. However, he still tries to blame Wall Street for his problems. Stewie quickly calls Brian out, arguing that he has navigated the business world with integrity while Brian has consistently failed to stand by his morals. In a pivotal moment, Stewie points out that money isn't the root of all evil. It's Brian's own choices that are to blame. The episode concludes with Stewie serving as a voice of reason, reminding everyone of the dangers of greed and the importance of personal accountability. Through this wild adventure, Brian's moral failings are laid bare, leaving viewers to ponder the true consequences of his actions.
In the Family Guy episode titled Herpy the Love Sore, we see one of the wildest stories in the show's history. It starts with Stewie and Brian watching the outlaw Josie Wales, specifically a scene where Clint Eastwood's character performs a Blood Brothers ritual with an Indian chief. Stewie is fascinated and asks Brian about the meaning behind it. Brian explains that mixing blood symbolizes a strong bond between people. Intrigued, Stewie takes it a step further and says, "Brian, I want you inside me." Brian is taken aback, but he agrees to the ritual, and they seal their friendship in a bizarre way. The next morning, Stewie wakes up to find his lips stuck to his pillow. When he looks in the mirror, he's horrified to see a nasty sore on his face, a herpes sore. Clearly, this isn't the typical way one would get such an infection. Naturally, Stewie goes straight to Brian, the last person he would expect to be involved. After a heated argument, Brian admits, "Okay, fine, I gave you herpes." This shocking confession reveals that Brian knew he had herpes before going through with the ritual, making it even worse. Brian brushes off the situation, claiming it's not a big deal, which only frustrates Stewie more. Determined to hide his STD, Stewie goes to daycare with a ridiculous disguise that includes a fake beard. But of course, his teacher sees through the disguise and rips it off, exposing Stewie's herpes to his classmates, who flee in terror. The situation escalates when Stewie goes home to tell Chris that he should get tested for herpes, since he might have been exposed. Chris overhears the conversation and shockingly reveals that he has his own herpes sore, which he also got from Brian during the same Blood Brothers ritual. Realizing they both have been affected, Stewie and Chris team up to get revenge on Brian. They start by crashing Brian's dates to inform the women that he has an STD, which proves to be quite effective, but they don't stop there. Frustrated with Brian, Stewie and Chris hack into his Facebook account, changing his name and profile picture to something more embarrassing. Brian, feeling the pressure, finally agrees to give them whatever they want to make things right. Chris simply asks to borrow Brian's Prius for a short drive, while Stewie makes a more outrageous request, a date with Neve Campbell. Brian can't deliver on that request, and Stewie admits he just wanted to make things difficult for him because he felt betrayed. In a rare moment of vulnerability, Brian admits, "I let you down. I was too embarrassed to admit I had herpes." This raises some eyebrows about whether the episode is trying to make excuses for Brian's actions. The story wraps up with Stewie coming to terms with having herpes for the rest of his life. Brian tries to reassure him, saying that it's not all that bad since herpes only flares up during stressful times. But Stewie points out that every day is stressful for him, making the situation even more complicated. Overall, this episode takes a bizarre and darkly comedic approach to a sensitive topic, exploring themes of friendship, betrayal, and the consequences of one's actions. Stewie's journey through embarrassment and frustration, combined with Brian's casual disregard for the seriousness of the situation, makes for a wild and memorable episode in the Family Guy series.